The mop handle was worn smooth, shaped by years of pressure from a hand that knew its work. Elias moved with a quiet, fluid economy, his passes across the marble floor leaving gleaming, dark trails that evaporated into a flawless shine. The rhythm was his own, a steady, internal metronome that kept the world at bay. His tools were old, the bucket scarred, the wringer bearing a faint squeak he knew how to silence with the precise application of weight. He was not a sad man, but a man who had made his peace with resilience. Tonight, that peace was accompanied by the soft scratching of a crayon on paper. His daughter, Maya, sat on a folded blanket near the utility closet, a small island of warmth in the vast, sterile ocean of the lobby. The sitter had cancelled, a fever, and Elias's world had reconfigured itself as it always did, contracting to protect its single, precious center. Maya was his gravity. She hummed a little tune, her brow furrowed in concentration as she drew a yellow sun with sprawling, uneven rays. The silence of the after-hours lobby was a fragile thing. It shattered. The chime of the executive elevator was sharp, followed by the percussive click of heels on marble. Annalise Sterling, CEO of Sterling Industries, strode into the lobby, her form a severe silhouette against the city lights glittering through the floor-to-ceiling glass. A subordinate, a young man in a rumpled suit, scurried behind her, clutching a tablet. "It's not an option, David. It's a directive." Annalise's voice was like chipping ice. "It didn't carry, it cut." "I don't pay for excuses. I pay for results. You have until morning to find the error in the due diligence, or you have until morning to clear out your desk." The words were not shouted. They were delivered with an unflinching coldness that was far more brutal. The young man flinched, his face pale under the recessed lighting. He stammered an apology, but Annalise was already moving, her focus lasered onto the exit, her fury a contained, pressurized force. The intensity of it, the sheer vibration of her anger, rolled across the lobby. It struck the small island of warmth where Maya sat. The little girl's crayon stopped. Her head snapped up. Her lower lip began to tremble. Her big, dark eyes fixed on the retreating form of the angry woman, and a choked sob broke from her chest. It was a sound of pure, uncomprehending distress. The sterile, hollow space amplified it, turning her small pain into a wail that echoed off the glass and steel. Elias was moving before the first tear fell. He didn't run, he flowed. He closed the distance in 3 long, silent strides, his worn work boots making no sound on the floor he had just polished. He knelt, turning his back to the elevators, creating a shield between his daughter and the source of her fear. He didn't speak. He didn't shush her. Instead, his hand went to the small pouch on his belt. He pulled out a small, translucent bottle. With a practiced twist, he unscrewed the cap and dipped the wand. He brought it to his lips, his gaze locked on Maya's, his expression a mask of unwavering calm. He blew. A single, perfect bubble emerged, catching the cold light and refracting it into a rainbow. It wobbled, a fragile sphere of impossible color, and began to drift. Maya's sob hitched. Her eyes, wide and wet, followed its silent, floating path. Elias blew another, and then another. Soon, a slow, shimmering cascade of bubbles was rising toward the vaulted ceiling, a silent, beautiful rebellion against the lobby's sharp angles and cold surfaces. Maya's crying softened into hiccuping breaths. A tiny, watery smile touched her lips as she reached out a small hand, not to pop the bubbles, but just to feel the space around them. The crisis was over. A deep, emotional wound had been staunched not with words, but with a quiet act of grace. From the mezzanine above, where she had turned back at the sound of the child's cry, Annalise Sterling watched. She had been unseen, a ghost in her own building. She saw the father's instinctive pivot, the nonverbal gentleness, the strange, effective solution. She saw the way he built a wall with his body, and then filled the space behind it with magic. It wasn't impressive. It was devastating. It was a language of care she did not speak, a form of strength she had never witnessed. It came from a place of deep, intuitive knowing that had nothing to do with power or money or control. A sharp breath caught in her throat. Her hand, perfectly manicured, rose to cover her mouth, a gesture so involuntary it terrified her. The armor she wore every day, the carefully constructed fortress of her life, had just been struck by a soap bubble. And a crack had appeared. She watched him murmur something to the child, his voice too low to hear, and help her to her feet. He began packing up the crayons, his movements slow and deliberate. Annalise descended the steel staircase, her heels now hesitant on the steps. Her corporate authority felt like a costume. She approached the janitor and his daughter, her mind a blank slate, her heart hammering against her ribs with a strange, unfamiliar rhythm. Elias looked up, his eyes calm, guarded. Annalise stopped a few feet away, the space between them charged with the silent collision of their two worlds. "I need someone who can fix things," she said, the words feeling foreign and clumsy in her own mouth. It was a test, a probe into this anomaly. Things no one else seems to see. Elias looked from the powerful woman to his daughter, who was now sleepily leaning against his leg. He was hesitant, his silence a question. He wasn't looking for a new job. He was looking for peace. "What kind of things?" he asked, his voice quiet, steady. Annalise held his gaze. "I'm not entirely sure yet." The 68th floor was a world of hushed efficiency, a symphony of muted clicks and filtered air. It smelled of nothing, which was the most expensive scent of all. Elias felt the change in atmospheric pressure. He wore a simple, dark gray uniform, nondescript but new, a stark contrast to the worn-out work clothes he'd left behind. Annalise had created a position for him. Facilities and Operations Analyst. The title was corporate nonsense. His job, as she had explained it, was to walk the floors, to observe, to report directly to her what he saw. He was her eyes on the ground, tasked with finding the friction points, the small inefficiencies everyone else was too busy or too important to notice. He found them everywhere. A persistent rattle in the HVAC system above the accounting department that caused subconscious tension and headaches. He traced it to a single loose bolt on a fan housing, tightening it in 5 minutes with a wrench from his new toolkit. He noticed the glare from the afternoon sun on the monitors in the marketing wing, a problem solved by a slight adjustment to the automated tinting schedule of the smart glass. He saw the way junior staffers hesitated by the coffee machine, which had a faulty grinder that periodically sprayed fine dust over the counter, a minor indignity they were too intimidated to report. He fixed it. Each act was small, quiet, and competent. He spoke little, simply doing the work. A memo would appear on Annalise's desk at the end of each day, written in clean, concise prose, detailing the problem and the solution. No embellishment. No request for praise. This quiet integrity did not go unnoticed. It was seen as an oddity, then a threat. Marcus Thorne, the chief operating officer, watched Elias with a predatory stillness. Thorne was a man carved from ambition, all sharp suits and predatory smiles. He was the architect of the impending $3 billion acquisition of a Korean tech firm, a deal that would be the crowning achievement of his career. He saw Elias's unique access to Annalise as an encroachment. He cornered Elias one afternoon by the executive kitchenette. "I don't know what game you're playing," Thorne began, his voice a low purr of condescension. He gestured vaguely at Elias's simple uniform. "But up here, we have professionals for that sort of thing. Stick to your squeaky wheels and leave the strategy to us." Elias met his gaze, his expression unreadable. He simply nodded, offering no defense. He wiped down the counter where the faulty coffee grinder had been, his silence a more potent response than any argument. Thorne was dismissed not with contempt, but with an utter lack of engagement. It infuriated him. Annalise saw it all. She saw the subtle shift in atmosphere when Elias entered a room, the slight relaxation of shoulders among the junior staff, the flicker of annoyance from executives like Thorne. She read Elias's daily reports not as a list of repairs, but as a catalogue of empathy. He wasn't just fixing machines, he was soothing the low-grade, chronic irritations of corporate life. He was removing the static, allowing for a clearer signal. Her intrigue deepened. There was a depth to him, a vast, hidden landscape behind his quiet eyes. She wanted to map it. The discovery happened by accident, late one evening. Annalise was working through projections for the acquisition, her office a pool of soft light and the otherwise dark floor. A low murmur drifted from the hallway. She assumed it was the cleaning crew, but the language was wrong. It was fluid, melodic, a string of sounds she didn't recognize. Korean. She rose from her desk, her curiosity pulling her toward the sound. She moved silently down the carpeted hall and peered into the small, unused office that Elias had adopted as his own. The door was slightly ajar. Elias sat at the simple desk, his back to her, a phone pressed to his ear. He wasn't speaking to anyone. He was listening to a recording, a rapid-fire news broadcast from a Seoul station. He had a small, worn notebook open, his pen flying across the page, capturing characters, Hangul, with a speed and elegance that was mesmerizing. He paused the recording, then spoke the phrases back to himself, not just mimicking the sounds, but inhabiting them. His accent was flawless, his intonation perfect. He corrected his own written notes, circling a character, making a marginalia about a subtle colloquialism, a nuance of honorifics that a standard translation would miss. He wasn't just a speaker of the language, he was a scholar of its soul. This wasn't a hobby. This was mastery. This was the hidden genius she had sensed. The man who fixed broken things did so because he understood, on a fundamental level, how systems worked, whether mechanical, social, or linguistic. Annalise felt a tremor of awe. She saw the worn notebook, the intense focus, the effortless command. This was the work of a man who had spent thousands of hours in deep, dedicated practice. This was a gift. A gift he used in private, in a borrowed office, long after everyone else had gone home. She backed away as silently as she had come, her heart pounding. The image of him at that desk was seared into her mind. It explained everything and nothing. It solidified her belief that Elias was an extraordinary man hiding in plain sight. It was the first true secret she shared with him, even though he didn't know it. A bond of knowledge, unseen and unspoken, had just been forged in the stillness of the empty office. And for the first time, she felt a flicker of something beyond respect. She felt a profound and unsettling intimacy. A few days later, a school holiday left Elias with no choice but to bring Maya to the office again. Annalise, seeing her from a distance, felt a pull she didn't try to resist. She found the little girl in the same small office Elias used, drawing at the desk while her father was troubleshooting a network issue on another floor. Annalise hesitated in the doorway. "Hello, Maya." Maya looked up, her eyes wide and serious. She wasn't shy. She simply observed. "Hello?" she said softly. Annalise stepped inside, feeling oddly clumsy in the small space. She knelt down, bringing herself to Maya's level. "That's a very beautiful drawing. What is it?" Maya turned the paper around. It was a portrait, rendered in bold crayon. A figure with a bright red dress and a shock of yellow hair stood alone in a big gray box. The figure had no mouth, but its eyes were huge, blue, and filled with scribbled, jagged lines. Rain fell inside the box. "It's you," Maya said, her voice a simple statement of fact. Annalise stared at the drawing. The red dress, the yellow hair, it was the outfit she had worn to a press event yesterday. The gray box was clearly her office. The rain. She felt a chill. "You have sad eyes," Maya said, tapping a small finger on the face in the drawing. It was a truth bomb, delivered with the devastating innocence of a child. It wasn't an accusation, it was an observation. Annalise couldn't breathe. No one had ever said anything so direct, so true, to her. In her world, people spoke in layers of flattery and fear. This child had peeled all of it away in a single sentence. She felt utterly exposed. "Scene." Maya pushed the drawing across the desk. "This is for you. So you don't get lonely." Annalise reached out and took the piece of paper. Her fingers, which signed billion-dollar contracts, trembled as they brushed against the waxy crayon. The simple, profound gift felt heavier than any stock portfolio. It was a lifeline thrown into the sterile silence of her life. "Thank you, Maya," she whispered, her voice thick. "Thank you?" When Elias returned, he found Annalise sitting quietly with his daughter, the two of them looking at one of Maya's picture books. A fragile peace filled the room. He saw the drawing on the desk beside Annalise's expensive leather portfolio. He saw the look in Annalise's eyes, a look of unguarded, aching vulnerability. The bridge had been built. Not between a CEO and her employee, but between a lonely woman and a little girl who saw the truth. And Elias knew, with a certainty that settled deep in his bones, that nothing would ever be the same. The rain began that evening, a soft patter that grew into a steady, percussive drumming against the glass walls of Annalise's penthouse. It was a sound that mirrored the disquiet in her soul. She had invited Elias over, under the pretense of discussing a security assessment for the upcoming delegation from Seoul. It was a flimsy excuse. The truth was, she could no longer bear the sterile silence of her own life. He arrived with a small, insulated bag containing a thermos of soup and 2 sandwiches. He had assumed she would not have eaten, and he was right. They sat not in her formal dining area, but in the softer, more intimate space of her library, surrounded by books she owned but had never read. The city lights glittered below, blurred and distant through the rain-streaked windows. For a long time, they sat in a comfortable quiet, the only sounds the rain and the soft clink of spoons against ceramic bowls. The empty space between them was filled with unspoken questions. Annalise broke the silence first, her voice barely above a whisper. "Why did you stop?" Elias looked up from his bowl, his gaze steady. He knew what she was asking. Not why he'd stopped working for the night, but the bigger question that hung in the air between them since she had seen him with his notebook. "My wife, Sarah," he began, his voice low and even, a confession held for years. "She was a linguist, too. A brilliant one. We met in a language immersion program in Kyoto. She used to say that every language was a different way of seeing the world. When you learned a new one, you gained a new soul." He paused, his eyes looking past Annalise, into a memory. "She was diagnosed when Maya was 2. Pancreatic cancer. It was fast. Brutal. We had all these plans, a translation agency we were going to start together, a life of travel. But everything just stopped." He looked down at his hands, resting on the table. "When she was gone, I had a choice. A high-pressure career in international relations that would have me in the air more than on the ground, or Maya. It was never a choice. So I put that part of myself away. I found a job that would let me be there to pick her up from school every day, a job that was quiet enough to let me think. A job that would let me be a father." He finally looked at Annalise, and for the first time, she saw the profound grief he carried, a wound he had tended to in silence for years. It was not a tragedy he lamented, it was a sacrifice he had quietly, lovingly made. Now it was her turn. The rain lashed against the window, as if trying to break in. "My father," she said, the words tasting like rust. "He never told me he loved me. Not once. He told me I was a good investment. He said love made people weak. Unfocused. He built this company, and he handed it to me not as a gift, but as a test. He said, 'Don't disappoint me.'" A tear she didn't know was there traced a path down her cheek. "The only time he ever looked proud was when I closed a deal that ruined his biggest competitor. The man was a family friend. I destroyed him. And my father," he smiled. "I learned that day that love, for him, was transactional. That worth was conditional. So I decided I didn't need it. I built walls of glass and steel around myself so high that no one could ever get close enough to disappoint me. Or for me to disappoint them." Her confession hung in the air, raw and bleeding. She was the girl in Maya's drawing, standing alone in a glass box in the rain. Elias reached across the table, his fingers gently covering hers. The physical contact was electric, a current of pure, unadulterated empathy. It wasn't pity. It was understanding. "You're not a disappointment," he said, his voice a simple, profound truth. In the quiet of the library, With the storm raging outside, two souls, wounded and hiding, finally showed each other their scars. They were no longer a CEO and an analyst. They were just Annalise and Elias. And they were no longer alone. The attack came swiftly, and it was not aimed at Annalise, but at Elias. It was a move of calculated cruelty, designed to sever the bond she had formed. Marcus Thorne, feeling his influence wane as Annalise's trust in Elias grew, had decided to eliminate the threat by destroying its foundation. The official letter arrived at Elias's small apartment on a Tuesday morning. It was from the county's Child Protective Services. An anonymous report had been filed, citing concerns of neglect. The report mentioned a transient lifestyle, the instability of his employment, and the fact that his daughter was often seen in inappropriate environments, like a corporate office late at night. Every detail was twisted to paint a picture of a struggling, unfit father. Elias read the letter twice, his blood turning to ice. This wasn't just a threat to his job, it was a threat to his entire world. Maya was the reason for every sacrifice, the center of his universe. The idea that she could be taken from him was a primal fear, a darkness so profound he couldn't breathe. He knew, with sickening certainty, who was behind it. Only someone with access to his employment history and knowledge of Maya's visits to the office could have crafted such a malicious and specific complaint. It was Thorne. His first instinct was to retreat, to pull away from Annalise and the high-stakes world that had brought this danger to his door. His self-imposed exile had been a form of protection. By stepping into the light, he had exposed his daughter to the shadows. He went to Annalise's office that afternoon, the letter folded in his pocket, a weight against his chest. He intended to resign. To disappear back into the quiet anonymity that had kept them safe. He found her on a call, her face tense. She was arguing with someone, her voice low but firm. When she saw him, she ended the call immediately. Elias. What is it? He didn't have to say a word. She saw the fear in his eyes, the deep, hunted look of a parent terrified for his child. He placed the letter on her desk. Annalise read it, her expression shifting from confusion to cold, diamond-hard fury. Her knuckles were white as she gripped the paper. This was not a corporate maneuver. This was a desecration. Thorne had crossed the line from professional rivalry into personal warfare. He had targeted a child. He's trying to get to me through you, she said, her voice dangerously quiet. She looked at Elias, at the quiet grief and new fear warring in his face. She saw the choice before her. She could distance herself from him, protect the company's image and appease the board who favored Thorne, or she could protect this family. Protect her new world. It wasn't a choice at all. No one, she said, her voice an iron vow, is going to touch your daughter. She picked up her phone, her fingers flying across the screen. I'm calling my personal attorney. The best in the city. We are going to fight this. And we are going to win. She looked up at him, her eyes blazing with a protective fire he had never seen before. Then, I'm going to handle Marcus Thorne. In that moment, she was no longer the queen in the glass tower. She was a warrior defending her territory. And her territory now included a quiet janitor and his little girl. The choice had been made. Annalise's response was not a quiet countermaneuver, it was a declaration of war. She didn't just provide Elias with a lawyer, she brought in a team. They descended upon the CPS complaint with the full force of her personal wealth and influence, dismantling the anonymous allegations with a meticulous and overwhelming barrage of evidence. School records, glowing teacher testimonials, pediatrician reports, character references from neighbors. The flimsy, malicious report crumbled under the weight of documented truth. But Annalise didn't stop there. She knew this was a symptom of a deeper poison within her company. She had to stand with Elias, not just legally, but publicly. She called an emergency meeting of the senior executive team. Marcus Thorne sat at the head of the table opposite her, a look of smug concern on his face, feigning surprise at the unfortunate situation. Annalise walked into the boardroom. Elias was with her. Not standing behind her, but beside her. He wore his simple gray uniform, a quiet statement of his identity, unashamed. The room fell silent. The sight of the CEO and the analyst, entering as a unified front, sent a shockwave through the executives. As some of you know, Annalise began, her voice calm and lethal, a vicious and unfounded attack has been made against a member of our team, Mr. Elias Vance. She let her gaze sweep the room, landing finally on Thorne. This attack was cowardly. It was personal. And it was manufactured by someone who believes that people are pawns to be sacrificed for personal gain. She placed a file on the polished table. I've had our internal security team review all network activity logs for the past month. It's amazing what you can find when you know what you're looking for. For instance, anonymous tips to government agencies made from firewalled IP addresses that can, with a little work, be traced back to a specific office in this very building. Thorne's practiced composure finally cracked. A flicker of panic crossed his eyes. Elias Vance is a man of more integrity, intelligence, and character than anyone in this room, Annalise continued, her voice ringing with conviction. He is under my personal and professional protection. Any threat to him or his family is a direct threat to me, and to the future of this company. She turned to Elias. In front of the entire executive team, she put her hand on his arm. It was a simple gesture, but it was in coronation. An explicit statement of trust and loyalty. You have our full support, Elias. He met her gaze and gave a single, firm nod. He had walked in ready to retreat, but she had given him ground to stand on. She hadn't saved him. She had stood with him. The alliance was forged. Annalise had drawn a line in the sand, putting herself in direct opposition to the corporate power structure she had once embodied. She had chosen her new world. And Marcus Thorne, for the first time in his career, looked terrified. The day of the final negotiations for the K-Tech acquisition arrived cloaked in a tense, gray drizzle. The boardroom on the 70th floor was an arena of glass and steel, prepared for the most important meeting in Sterling Industries' history. On one side sat Annalise, flanked by her legal team. On the other, Mr. Choi and the delegation from Seoul, accompanied by their translators. Marcus Thorne, pale but still present, sat slightly behind Annalise, a ghost at the feast. His power was broken, but Annalise had kept him on for this one final act. At Annalise's side, in a simple, well-tailored suit she had insisted on buying for him, sat Elias. His official role was Cultural Liaison and Special Advisor. The title meant nothing and everything. He was there because she trusted him. The meeting began, a formal dance of numbers and projections. Translators relayed information back and forth, their voices smooth and professional. The deal was worth $3 billion. It would redefine the industry. It was Thorne's magnum opus, and even in his disgrace, he watched with a hungry intensity. Elias said nothing. He watched. He listened. Not just to the words, but to the spaces between them. He observed the slight hesitation in one of the Korean translator's eyes, the way Mr. Choi's fingers subtly tightened on his pen during a discussion of patent transfers. He heard the nuances the official translators missed, a subtle shift in dialect, the use of a term that was slightly too informal, too dismissive, when discussing Sterling's intellectual property. Halfway through the presentation, as Annalise's team outlined the final stages of the asset merger, two of the Korean delegates began a quiet side conversation, believing themselves unheard. They spoke quickly, in a dense, regional dialect thick with business jargon. He's swallowing the hook, one said in Korean, a smirk playing on his lips. The intellectual property clauses are a Trojan horse. By the time they realize we can legally absorb their entire R&D portfolio, we'll already own the company. Thorne was useful. The other murmured back. His greed made him blind. He practically gave us the keys to the kingdom for a seat on a board that we intend to dissolve in 6 months. Elias felt a cold dread wash over him. It was a strip mine operation disguised as a merger. A hostile takeover hidden in plain sight. Thorne hadn't just been blind, he had been a willing accomplice to his own company's destruction. The room was moving on, Annalise readying to give her final approval. This was the moment of no return. Elias leaned forward, his movement urgent but controlled. He pitched his voice so only Annalise could hear, a quiet, intense whisper against the backdrop of the negotiation. Stop the deal. The words were a stone dropped into a still pond. Annalise froze. Her eyes snapped to his. She saw no panic in them. Only absolute certainty. The world seemed to slow down. $3 billion. Her father's legacy. Thorne's simmering ambition. The expectations of the entire board. All of it rested on this single moment. On one side, a mountain of data, lawyers, and experts. On the other, the quiet, unwavering conviction of one man. A man who fixed things no one else could see. A man she trusted more than anyone. She took a deep breath. Gentlemen, Annalise said, her voice ringing through the silent room. I'm afraid we have a problem. She stood up, her gaze sweeping from the stunned Korean delegation to the horrified face of Marcus Thorne. Mr. Vance, she said, her voice clear and strong. Would you be so kind as to translate, for the entire room, the conversation that just took place between these two gentlemen? The color drained from the faces of the two delegates. Mr. Choi looked on in confusion. Elias stood. He looked directly at the two men, and in perfect, formal Korean, he repeated their entire conversation verbatim. He translated their words about the Trojan horse, about Thorne's complicity, about dissolving the board. The silence that followed was absolute, a vacuum where a $3 billion deal had just been. Thorne lunged to his feet. This is absurd. He's a janitor. She's sabotaging the deal. Annalise didn't even look at him. Her eyes were on Mr. Choi, who now stared at his subordinates with a look of pure fury. The ruse was exposed. Security, Annalise said calmly. Please escort Mr. Thorne from the building. His association with Sterling Industries is terminated, effective immediately. As security guards moved in on a sputtering, defeated Thorne, Annalise walked to Elias's side. In front of the shocked board members and the disgraced delegation, she reached out and took his hand. It was not a gesture of romance. It was a public gesture of their unity. A silent, powerful declaration that this was her partner. This was the man whose integrity had just saved her company. The world saw them not as a CEO and an employee, but as a team. His worth, once hidden, was now vindicated for all to see. The fallout was immediate and contained. The K-Tech deal was dead, the story of its fraudulent nature contained by a flurry of non-disclosure agreements. Marcus Thorne was gone, a cautionary tale whispered in the corridors. The board, initially shocked, was now profoundly grateful, their faith in Annalise's leadership cemented not by a profitable deal, but by a catastrophic loss averted. That night, the 70th floor was quiet again. The boardroom was empty. Annalise and Elias stood by the vast window, looking down at the river of headlights flowing through the city. The storm had passed. You saved it, Annalise said softly. Everything my father built. Everything I've worked for. You saved it. We saved it, he corrected gently. He turned to face her. You were the one who had to make the choice. You were the one who listened. In the soft glow of the city lights, the space between them shimmered with everything they had been through. The fear, the alliance, the victory. It all culminated in this quiet, peaceful moment. The professional loose ends were tied. All that remained was the personal one. Annalise looked at him, at the quiet strength in his eyes, at the man who saw the world with a clarity she was only just beginning to learn. She saw the father, the scholar, the hero. She saw the man who had shown her what true strength was. He was wrong, she whispered, a confession of her own. My father. He was wrong about everything. Elias moved closer, lifting a hand to gently cup her jaw. His thumb brushed away a tear she hadn't realized had fallen. Love doesn't make you weak, he said, his voice a profound truth that settled into the deepest part of her. It makes you brave. And then, he leaned in and kissed her. It was not a kiss of passion, but of homecoming. It was a kiss of profound relief, of recognition, of two fractured souls finally finding their whole, mirrored in each other. It was the peaceful, cathartic end of one life, and the beginning of another. It was a promise. 18 months later, the afternoon sun streamed through the large windows of a beautifully restored brownstone. The light was warm, filled with the sound of children's laughter from the garden outside. The air inside smelled of wood polish, old paper, and cinnamon. It was a cluttered, happy space, filled with books in a dozen languages, comfortable, worn furniture, and Maya's vibrant drawings taped to every available surface. Elias sat at a large wooden desk, a young Ethiopian woman beside him, going over an asylum application. He pointed to a phrase, explaining the subtle legal distinction in Amharic, his voice gentle and encouraging. Annalise walked in, carrying a tray with 3 glasses of lemonade. She placed the glass by Elias's elbow, leaning down to press a soft kiss to his temple. She smiled at the young woman, who smiled back with a look of deep gratitude. Maya ran in from the garden, her cheeks flushed, and threw her arms around Annalise's legs. This was their new normal. A happy, domestic tableau that was a universe away from the sterile, high-stakes world they had once inhabited. This brownstone was the headquarters of the Sarah Vance Foundation, a non-profit they had launched together. Funded by Annalise's resources and run by Elias's expertise, it provided free linguistic, cultural, and legal services to immigrants and refugees. It was a place of hope and healing, a mission born from their individual wounds and forged into a shared purpose. They weren't just fixing faulty wiring anymore. They were mending broken lives, building bridges between worlds. Later that evening, after Maya was asleep, they sat in the garden, the setting sun painting the sky in hues of orange and gold. Annalise leaned her head on Elias's shoulder, her hand resting in his. They didn't need to speak. The quiet between them was full and complete. He had taught her the language of peace. She had taught him he was worthy of being seen. She held up the framed drawing Maya had given her all that time ago, the girl in the red dress, alone in the gray box. She had kept it on her desk at the foundation. She saw it from the very beginning, Annalise murmured. Elias wrapped his arm around her, holding her close. She did, he agreed. But now, the rain has stopped. Their new beginning was not an ending, but a continuation. It was a testament that the strongest structures are not built of glass and steel, but of trust, integrity, and the courage to love. True power was not in the ability to command, but in the capacity to care. Where are you watching from? We love seeing how far these stories travel. If this story touched your heart, please like and comment below with your thoughts. Your support allows us to keep creating content that we hope brings a little more light into the world. Thank you for spending your time with us. Until next time, stay kind, stay hopeful, and never stop listening to the quiet voices that tell the truth.